Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May Policy Insights. I'm very happy today to have here Donatus, who is a young entrepreneur, co-founder of 3.0 Lab Venture, which is a Web3 venture studios that works in bringing the benefits of the Web3 technology towards people. And we'll talk us about the Metaverse and what is money in the Metaverse. So Donatus, thank you very much for being here. What can you tell us about this fascinating new world that everyone keeps hearing, but no one really knows what it is?
Yeah, it's a very big word, the metaverse. So people understand different things about it. The way that I like to understand it is on sort of two elements. The metaverse, in essence, is sort of two layers. The primary one is the infrastructure layer, mostly built on distributed ledger technologies such as the blockchain, which allow for the ownership of digital assets and the transfer of such. And then the second layer is the interfacing layer, which some people might see as virtual reality or augmented reality and mixed reality, but could also mean completely different things. In many ways, it's yet to be determined metaverses be, but that's how most people understand it nowadays.
Fantastic. And how do you see the word of money moving to the metaverse? What is it? How it can happen?
Yeah, so in practice, moving money into the metaverse or using money in the metaverse might mean something very similar to what we see nowadays in terms of Swift bank transfers or the exchange of funds from one individual to the next. But it's probably going to be a lot more pure, which is on the basis of that decentralized infrastructure layer. So what does that mean in principle? What we're doing with Web3 or the metaverse is we're taking the traditional use of cash from the times that the first currency was invented thousands of years ago, from one individual to the next. And we're combining it with more recent innovations around international banking by the means of systems such as Swift, for example, and combining the two so that you suddenly have a digital element where one individual to the next can transfer goods, services, and thus pay with a certain currency without the need for middlemen. What this does not mean, however, is necessarily that centralized institutions such as are going to falter away. I personally believe quite the contrary. What it will most likely mean is that such centralized institutions can access similar services as they've done nowadays in the traditional world, namely lending and borrowing or custodianship of assets, or maybe liquidity provision to individual systems like central banks. The only difference is that now they can do so in a borderless economy that is cross-boundary. And they thereby access the 1.7 billion people around the world that remain unbanked but have access to internet and the smartphone. So this could be very interesting because such banks then don't have to rely on lengthy bureaucratic KYC processes used to assess the creditworthiness of individuals, and instead work on a trustless layer that is secured by smart contracts and ensure there's no counterparty risk, which could be a tremendous industrial opportunity for such institutions.
Well, it's fascinating, and I think I feel so ignorant. I'm only at digital currencies and crypto assets. So this is even beyond. But what the metaverse means for payments specifically, how do the rails of payments have to adapt to the new world?
It's not going to be an easy process, that's for sure. The way that I like to frame this is, if you're looking at the development of the metaverse or Web3 as a payments mechanism or as an ownership mechanism, you're looking at something that is similar or greater than the magnitude of the introduction of corporate stock in 1862. And that back then was a tremendous innovation disruption to existing legacy economic systems. And the country that introduced it, the UK namely, had to adapt its regulatory measures to facilitate this. It's taken 160 years, and to this day, we're still working on making this process as fluent as possible. So to assume that moving money into the metaverse overnight would be possible would be not just wrong, it would actually be dangerous. Because the way that governments will have to, or regulators will have to adapt to this new system is slowly but surely, ideally with a framework set out that facilitates innovation and doesn't scare off people from an individual country, and one that at the same time produces some sort of value for the individual citizens and takes into consideration the systemic risk that could be associated with allowing them to exist. So it's not an easy question. If I were to give regulators advice, I would say, take it one step at a time. Make sure that regulation isn't implemented too hastily, or that at the same time, this new emergent industry is not packed into the existing regulatory system, because that might cause an issue. I've got two examples for that. The first one would actually be one of a regulator attempting to push the crypto or Web3 industry into existing regulatory frameworks. And that's in the United Kingdom, where the FCA at first was seen very positively when requested certain information. But as soon as these Web3 startups realized how much information asked of them, they were incentivized to leave to more crypto-friendly places such as, say, Switzerland or Dubai. And in the second example, you can see a regulator implementing a hasty decision, which may be out of ease of implementing it, or because they don't understand exactly how they want to fit it, because it needs to move fast. And that's the European Union deciding a full blanket ban on cold and hot wallets, which yet again disincentivizes any crypto startup from entering the space and instead moving away.
I really wanted to touch this as well, like, because you're talking about how different countries are tackling this new regulatory process. Like, how do you feel about, you live in Germany, so how is Germany doing with this? And Germany is clearly one of the leading countries in the EU, so it should be copied or emulated somehow. But like, are you happy with how Germany is processing this? Or do you think that, for example, France is more ahead? Because what's your opinion?
So many people see Germany as a front runner in crypto-friendly policy, which is mostly due to the fact that its existing framework allows for capital gains tax, provided that you hold a certain asset for the course of a year or longer. I've even seen an article recently that ranked Germany as the most crypto-friendly country in the world. But I think it's important to understand that this kind of policy is not a policy that was implemented specifically for crypto. It's just an existing policy that happens to be beneficial to people who invest in crypto. It also doesn't take into consideration the entire ecosystem of decentralized finance, the transfer of digital assets, or any of the such. So I would not necessarily see personally Germany as very front-running. I think the country is being very careful in its adoption. And instead, a country that embraces crypto regulation and at least tries to implement a new regulatory framework, to me, would be far more forward-thinking.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you've heard that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has announced that he wants to make Britain the centre for crypto assets, a global hub for all of this new technology. Would you consider moving to the UK if this should lay out in an effective deployment of policy?
I think that that's a very good stance to take on behalf of the UK, and could potentially position it in a very beneficial economic manner. As one of the sort of leading developed economic nations that actually have a legacy system to disrupt, it's very brave, but I also think very symbolic. I was naming the example earlier, the introduction of the joint corporate stock in 1862. So once again, the UK seems to be taking the front run. It's yet to be seen what these implementations mean, but if favorable and if carefully placed, I do think that it's going to attract a lot of crypto startups and Web3 startups back into the United Kingdom.
Fantastic. Well, so I hope that you can move here and grow in an economic, crypto-friendly and digital currency environment in Britain. And well, I would have so many questions, but we usually keep this insights policy as a way to trigger curiosity. So I do invite everyone who has questions on the metaverse to get in touch with the Payments Association, and we will provide experts such as Donatus to explain you all the things that you don't understand and how to move to what's the metaverse. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.